The Nintendo Switch is amazing. The concept is revolutionary. You get two worlds, a great home console and a fantastic handheld. To add to the sweetness, you get to play the same cartridges and downloads for both, because it's only one console. It's about time somebody made it happen. Playing handheld games on your TV isn't a new concept. It's been done plenty of times in the past. Almost all the big console manufacturers have dabbled in it at some point. It's been done in many different ways. First off, Sega made the Nomad, which is like a Switch in the 90s. It's kind of bulky because it has to be. It plays full-size Sega Genesis cartridges. If you wanted to play the Nomad on the go, you had to pack around these giant cartridges with you. It's a neat idea. Being a Super Nintendo kid, I often found myself wanting to play SNES games on the go. Genesis owners were lucky to have such a device. What makes the Nomad even more interesting is that it can output video to the TV. It even has another controller port for a second player. You could buy a Nomad and have a Sega Genesis console and Sega Genesis handheld. If Sega would have pushed this over the Game Gear, I probably would have begged my parents to get me one. Sony also tried portable gaming on the TV. The PSP was the first Sony handheld. The graphics on it were amazing for the time. They were so good it seemed perfect for them to be played on the TV. Fortunately, Sony had this on their mind too. Much like the Nomad, the PSP connects directly to the TV with component cables that are made specifically for it. It was pretty neat being able to play PSP games on the TV. You could also download past PlayStation 1 games and play it on the PSP as well. I thought it was great seeing these games on that small screen. Sometimes your perspective really changes depending on the way you see these games. The successor to the PSP was a leap forward graphically for Sony handhelds. The PS Vita also implemented a more traditional controller layout similar to their controllers. The two thumbsticks allowed it to have games that were traditionally designed for home consoles, making a seamless transition for PS Vita games to be played on the TV. Following the blueprints of the PSP, the Vita would have been an all-in-one home handheld hybrid. That didn't happen. Sony decided to nix the idea and release a whole new box to play Vita games. They decided to call it the PS TV. Not all PS Vita games are compatible with it, which is a slight letdown. Some of the games require the use of the touchpad that's located on the back of the console, and the PS3 controller is the only controller that's compatible with the PS TV, and it doesn't have a touchpad, leaving those games that require it unplayable. I've heard that you can modify the PS TV to play those games, but I'm not 100% on that. Even though the PS Vita is a step back from the PSP with video out, I'm happy Sony gave us the option to play those games on the TV. I ended up grabbing the PS TV for like $30 on clearance a few years ago. The games play really well on the TV. Sony also made the Vita compatible with remote PS4 gameplay, meaning you could play your PS4 games on the PS Vita if you had a reliable internet connection. Kind of like how the Wii U's gamepad allowed it to play Wii U games when the TV's off. I never experienced this feature, but I thought it was a great idea. It was built with the iconic PlayStation controller layout in mind. It made so much sense for this to happen. Like the PSP, the Vita also allowed classic PlayStation games to be played on it. I downloaded quite a few PS1 games on my Vita. The NES was king of the living room in the 1980s and early 90s. If you wanted to play video games in that era, you simply asked your friends, "Do you want to play Nintendo?" It didn't matter if you were playing a different console. It was always referred to as Nintendo. Since they owned the living room and television, Nintendo decided to capitalize on their popularity and made a handheld. We all know this as the Game Boy. The Game Boy was massively popular. All my friends had one growing up, and so did I. The problem with the Game Boy is the painful screen the games are displayed on. However, we didn't know any better back then. We thought that's how the games were programmed. Little did we know, they were made to look so much better. The Game Boy lasted for over a decade. With all the games that were made for the Game Boy, Nintendo noticed an opportunity and jumped on it. Nintendo was deep in the throes of a console war with Sega in the mid-90s. The Super Nintendo has some of the best games ever made that would go down as some of the most beloved classics of all time. But what made the Super Nintendo an even better console was the Super Game Boy. It allowed Game Boy owners to play Game Boy games on their TVs with a special cartridge that housed the actual Game Boy hardware. It was literally a Game Boy you plugged into your SNES. It's as authentic of an experience as you can have. An added bonus to this is being able to use the SNES controller to control the games. The Super Nintendo controller felt great with these games. The ergonomics of the controller allowed for longer gameplay sessions, and you didn't have to worry about eating through 4 AA batteries. Not only did current Game Boy owners get the chance to play Game Boy games, but people who didn't own a Game Boy could also play those games. It gets even better because it enhances the games by adding color to them. It was simply mind-blowing seeing Game Boy games like this. They also added the ability to customize color palettes. We've never had anything else like this that allows for such customization. This was the definitive way to play original Game Boy games. Being able to play these portable games at home on a bigger, better screen was heaven sent. The drawback to the Super Game Boy is it only plays original Game Boy games. It's not compatible with Game Boy Color or Game Boy Advance games, though it does support special Super Game Boy Enhanced games that come with colored cartridges, like the yellow Donkey Kong Land games and the black cartridges like the Link's Awakening DX. The Super Game Boy is such a wonderful device, but that was just the tip of the iceberg for what was to come. Throughout the next console generation, we still only had the Super Game Boy to play original Game Boy games. The N64 was completely skipped over when it came to playing Game Boy games on the TV. It wasn't until the GameCube that Nintendo would again add handheld gaming to their home console. It released 2 years after the console's launch. It also completed the Cube. They called it the Game Boy Player. Like the Super Game Boy, it's made out of real Game Boy hardware. It also played original Game Boy games. It displayed them in the color palettes that are available in the Game Boy Color, which even includes a true black and white option. With the color palettes being available, that meant that Game Boy Color games finally got their chance, and boy did they ever. These games were so much fun to play on the big screen. It lends so much more to the games because you can actually appreciate the colors and details. But this wasn't where it ended. It was also compatible with the newest handheld at the time, the Game Boy Advance. Playing them on a properly lit display made them look so good. It's nice having the ability to play Game Boy games on the go, then continue playing them at home on the Game Boy player. This was a must-own when I found out that it could play all generations of Game Boy games. Though the controller isn't ideal for Game Boy games, the workaround for this is to simply plug into Game Boy Advance with the Game Boy to Game Boy Advance link cable. You can't get a more authentic Game Boy experience than this. You're actually using a Game Boy to play Game Boy games. Unfortunately, I didn't experience the Game Boy player during its initial run. I was a full-on PlayStation 2 kid, and I completely skipped over the GameCube. I did have a Game Boy Advance though. If I would have known that I could play all my Game Boy games on the TV, I would have absolutely begged my parents to buy me a GameCube just for this reason. I love the Super Game Boy, but I would have adored the Game Boy player. I had a fairly good-sized Game Boy game collection that I relegated to the Game Boy Advance SP. If only I could have played them on the TV. During the Wii era of gaming, Nintendo really didn't do any cross-compatibility with their handhelds and home consoles. This was mainly due to the fact that they added a second screen to the DS. How would they have made it possible to play these games on the TV? There was just no way to do it. So it was never done. The Wii U, however, has the ability to play dual-screen games thanks to the often-mocked gamepad. It was perfectly suited to have compatibility with DS and 3DS games. What a perfectly tailored machine to execute such a concept. But this didn't happen. True, DS games were made available to download on the Virtual Console. Playing physical cartridges was never a reality. But the Wii U did have a feature that was pretty innovative. You could play your console games on the gamepad with your TV off. I used this quite a bit when somebody wanted to watch TV and I wanted to play a game. It only worked if you were close to the console, which was never a problem for me. I used my 3DS for handheld gaming during this time, so this feature worked perfectly for my situation. Speaking of the 3DS, it got some home console games from the NES, SNES, and a few Sega Genesis games, so that's kind of a home console to portable gaming. After the Wii U nosedived with the gaming community, Nintendo went back to the drawing board and made the console most of us thought the Wii U would be. They refined the design and perfected the ideas the Wii U brought to the table. When I first heard what the Switch was supposed to be, I didn't think it was a real concept. a portable console that connects to a dock that can display the games on the TV. It also has removable controllers that can be used as separate controllers for two-player gaming. Then out of the blue, Nintendo reveals it, and it makes complete sense. The design looks modern. It doesn't feel cheap. It feels great in your hands during gameplay. And most importantly, it functions exactly how it was described. It's a portable console that can be docked to be played as a home console. It is the fusion of both those worlds. Long gone are the days that you have to buy separate games for your portable console and your home console. Technology has finally come to the point where console quality games can be played on the go and continue being played at home from the same device. It's the culmination of gaming ideas that have been melded into a single unit. Thank heavens there's a company like Nintendo that's willing to take risks on out-of-the-box ideas and not solely focus on bigger, better graphics. Playing handheld games on your TV isn't a new concept. It's been done plenty of times in the past. Though the path to playing home console games on the go or portable games on the living room TV has been a decades-long journey, the ideas that were learned from all that time came together into a generation-defining machine. The concept is revolutionary. Two worlds become one. The gap was finally closed. A single great home console and a fantastic handheld were made possible. The Nintendo Switch is simply amazing.